So today is Evans and the causal theory of reference. I'm told that today the audio is working just great. So naturally there is a problem with the video, but there you go. I'm sorry, I've tried, but I can't see how to get this any better. Okay, the causal theory of names. So we looked at Putnam and Kripke giving the basic statements of causal theories, but in a way, neither Putnam nor Kripke is giving a fully uncompromising causal theory. Kripke says for a name to refer to an object, there must be a causal chain of communication going back to an initial baptism of the object. But then how the initial baptism works is not so clear. He says that that can be by description or maybe ostension, whatever that is. And then in Putnam, again, it looks like Putnam's giving a causal theory. But as we saw last time, he also talks about natural kind words as being governed by these systematic rules for fixing their references. Evans does give a full-fledged causal theory of reference. He means it to incorporate what's right about the description theory, but at bottom, his positive account is a theory of reference, how our signs get hooked up to the world that's causal all the way down. So he has criticisms of description theories, he has criticisms of Kripke's theory, and he has criticisms of Kripke's criticisms of the description theory. But if you follow me, but today I'm not going to do any of that negative stuff. I just want to sketch out what Evans's positive picture of reference is, how he thinks language gets hooked up to the world. So in the first section, I want to talk about his notion of a dominant source of information. He introduces this notion of a dominant source of information that plays a big part in the theory. Then he's got this example of Napoleon, the name Napoleon, that really illustrates how the whole positive theory is meant to work. And then finally, I'm going to go a bit beyond what he says in the text and look at how his theory could apply to perception and to memory. Okay, that's the plan. Sorry, someone's standing at the door, looking in the window at the door, and I'm just trying to look encouragingly at them. But as so often happens when I look encouragingly at people, he went away. Okay. Anyway, dominant source of information. This is really a way of giving a richer gloss on what Kripke means by cause. If you think about it, just to say that a sign refers to what caused the use of that sign, that can hardly be enough, because there are all kinds of causation, right? I mean, suppose I've never heard of Aristotle, I've never used the name Aristotle, but you have got this trick. You can do. You just give me a sharp blow to the head, and just by accident, that does something to my brain. So I now start using the word Aristotle. I say Aristotle, Aristotle, Aristotle. Now you caused me to use that name, but I might not even have seen you, right? I just got this blow to the head. This came from behind, took me by surprise. If I'm now using that name, Aristotle, as a result of that, that does not mean that my use of the name is referring to you. You certainly caused my use of the name, but I'm not referring to you. And any causal theory of reference has to say, not just any kind of causation will do, it's got to be the right kind of causation. So this talking about the dominant source of information is a way of trying to explain what we mean by the right kind of causal connection. You have to say it's got to be the right kind of causal connection between an object and a sign for the sign to refer to the object. So the way Evans does it is he gives this as a definition of intends to refer. A speaker intends to refer to the item that is the dominant source of his associated body of information. So when you're using a name, when you're using a sign to refer, there will always be some information or other that you associate with the sign, some body of information. And then we've got the notion of what's the dominant cause? Source in the sense of a journalist's source. Source as the one who gives you the information. This is usually our knowledge or belief about particular items is derived from, caused via information gathering transactions involving causal interaction with some item or other conducted ourselves. That is, you know, you get to know Bill, you interact with Bill, you are engaged in an information gathering transaction with Bill where you find out lots about him. Or maybe it's derived through a long chain from the transactions of others. So other people find out about Bill and tell you about him. They interacted with him and then they gave the information to you. Right? So if Bill is a celebrity, then it will come from a chain through the transactions of others. So when you're doing that, when you're conducting your investigations on Bill, you are generating a dossier of information on Bill. Whether you find out about this person by seeing them, by talking to them, whether it's by finding out about them through a photograph, rifling through their suitcase, or what other people say, one way or another, you are generating a cluster or a dossier of information on that person. And Evans says, what does it mean, the dominant source of your dossier of information? I mean, in the sense in which the police can have a dossier of information on someone. A cluster or a dossier of information can be dominantly of an item, though it contains elements whose source is different. And that kind of seems common sense enough, that if you have a police file on one person, then information that's actually data about other people, derived from other people, might have got into the file by accident. Some stray bits of paper relating to other people might have got into the file. But still, the file is basically about one specific person, is dominantly of one specific person. I was trying to find a photograph to illustrate my point, and actually the blurring here probably helps. This is from a game of rugby, and this is a kind of tangle of limbs as happens in a game of rugby. So here you got a dossier of information, right? You can see what this is. No? Right. This is a head. This is an arm going up. This is a pair of knees. And over here is someone will just call the victim. Okay? So you got a tangle of limbs there. You got a dossier of information that mostly relates to this guy, but there are bits of information coming from someone else. It's mainly a photo of this guy. Now, what does it mean is dominantly of this guy? Well, Evans makes some somewhat cryptic remarks about this. It's not simply the amount of information, whatever that means. You have to take my word for this with the photos a little bit, but if you just count the pixels, it might be there are just as many pixels relating to this guy as there are to this guy. So however you exactly, it's not obvious how you'd count bits of information anyhow, but if you just count it in terms of volumes of pixels, being dominantly of this guy would not be a matter of just contributing the most pixels. In the case of persons, for example, each man's life presents a skeleton, and the dominant source of the information may be the man who contributed to covering most of the skeleton, rather than the man who contributed most of the covering. You really have to say that fast for it to sound good. I'm not really sure it makes sense, but what he's saying is whoever covered most of the skeleton, rather than whoever contributed most of the covering. So here, if you get a whole bunch of information about this guy's knee, right? Suppose there's just a ton of information about the knee of one player, and kind of minimal information about the whole of this player, then this player's knee may be contributing most of the covering, if you see what I mean. All the knee bit, all that volume of information about the knee is coming from this guy. But this guy is the one you're getting information about the whole skeleton. So in that sense, the dominant source is the one who's contributed to covering most of the skeleton, rather than the one who contributed most of the covering. Most of it. I'm not explaining that very well, am I? No. Well, most of the covering is just a matter of sheer volume, right? If the amount of data that you're getting is a ton of it about some tiny bit of this guy, as it might be the knee, that's most of the covering. But covering most of it is getting the flesh on over all the skeleton. Detail in a particular area, there you are, that's what I was saying. Detail in a particular area can be outweighed by spread. So you get a lot of detail in the knee. That doesn't count because this other guy is contributing the spread. You see what I mean? So if you're looking in the police dossier, and there's a ton of information about what happened on one not particularly important night in 1969, but that's in the context of the whole story of someone else's life, even if it's quite a schematic story, then the dossier is a dossier about the person whose whole life is being covered there. That's what he's saying. That's a dominant source. And anyway, your reasons for being interested in the item at all will weigh. So the dominant source, it depends why you care. So in this case, if what you really care about is rugby, then you'll care more about this guy because you're getting more detail in what he's doing in the play of the game, and the knee is neither here nor there. On the other hand, if what you're really interested in is knees, then you may say really the guy who's the dominant source here is the guy whose knee it is. Or in the case of the police dossier, if what you're interested in is this whole criminal life, and you've just wedged in a lot of detail about some unimportant event by mistake, then the unimportant event won't matter for who's the dominant source. On the other hand, if what you're really interested in is that event in 1969, then you'll say, that's the dominant source of this information. So if you think about the case of Shakespeare, the reason we're interested in Shakespeare is the plays. So the dominant source of our information about Shakespeare is going to be through the plays, being the author of these plays, and details about his domestic life just don't matter. We might have got someone else's file in with what little is known about Shakespeare's domestic life, and still the dominant source is the person who wrote is the person from whom we derive the information via the plays, because really we don't care a bit about who Shakespeare was married to, or where he lived, or his second best bed, or all that kind of thing. On the other hand, if what we were really interested in was his home life, the plays wouldn't matter at all. for who was the dominant source of the information. So this is just trying to explain this intuitive notion of a dominant source. It's not sharply defined. Exactly what you're after will depend on the context and why you're interested in the thing. But that's all you get from Evans. So is that plain enough about dominant source? I'm not sure that makes it much more comprehensible than it was to begin with, but yeah. That's a very good question. Right. This is all by way of Evans's definition of what a speaker intends to refer to, right? So suppose I've literally got a dossier of information, I have a police file, yeah, then, and I just say, okay, let's call this person X, then who I intend to refer to when I use the name X is the dominant source of the information in the file. Right? That's the first connect with reference. This is just really a definition. It's not important as far as I can see that the notion of intention is even being used here. We're just talking about the item that's a dominant source. Plain as day? Plain enough? Okay. As plain as it's going to get. Okay. Okay. So let's look at, in more detail, at Evans's full theory of how this connects to reference. So he considers two scenarios. Remember Napoleon's career. Remember Napoleon's career, the first Napoleonic Wars, the disastrous campaigns in Germany and Russia of 1812 and 1813. Well, I actually spent 10 minutes in Wikipedia before coming here, so I am ahead of most of you. A little bit. But anyway, Napoleon disastrously failed to negotiate with France and with Germany and Russia and Britain in 1813 and 1814. They would have let him keep vast tranches of land, but he refused to cooperate. Instead, tried to take Germany and Russia, and was roundly defeated and imprisoned on Elba. Suppose that, and then he escaped and famously tried to do it all again until being defeated at Waterloo. Remember all that? Dear old Napoleon. Right. Anyway, as Russell said, making people think about him. Okay, now suppose that what happened was that in Elba, one person who'd been imprisoned with Napoleon killed him and impersonated him. So an impersonator took over Napoleon's life, what we think of as Napoleon's life, after Elba. And it was this impersonator who fought at Waterloo. Now consider the file of information that an actual typical historian nowadays has on Napoleon. Is that cluster of information dominantly of Napoleon or dominantly of the impersonator? So there's all this information about Napoleon up to the disastrous campaigns of 1812 and 1813 and his imprisonment in Elba. And then there's just a little bit left when he escapes from Elba and fights at Waterloo. And then it's all over, right? So there's a long bit about his early life, his early exploits, conquering Europe and so on. And then there's a little bit after he escapes from Elba. And the impersonator just takes over after Elba. Let me put it to you again. Consider the dossier of information that the historian has on this guy, that they associate with the name Napoleon. Is that dossier of information dominantly about has its dominant source the early guy or the late guy?
Early guy.
Very good. That is the right answer. So the cluster of the, in fact, it's written up there, so actually it's not that good that you got it. But okay. The cluster of the typical historian is still dominantly of the man responsible for the earlier exploits. Okay? That's okay. And in that case, when if that was what was going on, then when people say Napoleon fought at Waterloo, then that's going to express a false belief. Because it wasn't Napoleon who fought at Waterloo. It was this impersonator. And the moral here is that the name Napoleon is referring to the dominant source of that cluster of beliefs. So that's to tighten that connection between reference and dominant source. The person you're talking about is the dominant source of the beliefs you associate with the name. Plain as day? Okay. Suppose, and follow me very closely here, suppose, on the other hand, that back in 1793, when Napoleon was just a promising youth, just beginning in his early steps in the ladder, suppose that what happened was that someone killed the person named Napoleon and took over, impersonated him, took over his life, impersonating this unknown army officer. And then this impersonator goes on to fight the great battles of the First Napoleonic Wars, has the unsuccessful campaigns of 1812 and 1813, and is imprisoned in Elba. In that case, who is the dominant source of the historian's dossier? The impersonator. Very good. Right. Okay. I'm not trying to make a secret of it. Okay. So then the cluster of the typical historian would be dominantly of the impersonator. And in that case, when you use the name Napoleon, who would you be referring to? If you say Napoleon fought at Waterloo, in that case it'll express a true belief, because it will be the unknown the impersonator of that unknown army officer that is the dominant source of the cluster of beliefs. So again, the moral is that the name is referring to whoever is the dominant source of the cluster of beliefs. Actually, you have to be a little bit careful about this. I'm saying refers to, but that is a simple version of the theory. Because remember, what I actually said was the speaker intends to refer to, right? So, the point here is this expresses a true belief, because when you use this name, you're intending to refer to the dominant source of the cluster of your beliefs, right? So you've got a cluster of beliefs, all using the same name. The intended reference is the dominant, whoever is actually the dominant source. So here's the situation. Here's the first situation where here's I can't remember which way around this is. Here's here's the successful army officer conducting the First Napoleonic Wars and being sent to Elba. Here is the guy who takes over and impersonates him from Elba on. Then we've got the cluster of beliefs here. Napoleon is F1, F2, F3, and so on. And here, this guy is the dominant source. In this situation, the impersonator takes over much earlier, and here, beta is the dominant source. Yep. So in this case, the intended referent is alpha. In this case, the intended referent is beta. Plain as day? Yep.
That kind of brings up a question about the dominance again.
Mm-hmm.
Because say in the first scenario where he took over in 1814,
Yep.
suppose prior to 1814, Napoleon just was doing things that we weren't interested in. And
Yes.
an impersonator comes along,
Right.
we're all of a sudden interested, so we have all this detailed information on a smaller portion, which doesn't have spread.
Yes.
But it seems like when we speak of Napoleon, in that case, we would be referring to the second one.
That's very good. Yes, right. If all Napoleon had ever done of any interest was after 1814, then in this case, we still want to say the dominant source is this guy, because this guy did all the stuff that we were interested in, because all the stuff we were interested in came here. Is that right? That's your point?
Well, I was kind of confused because if that's like a shorter period of time, then
Right.
it seems like there's more detail, like a detailed need versus...
Exactly. Very good. Yes, right.
I thought the spread was...
The critical thing. Well, let's see. Your point is, in this case, detail in the particular area is outweighing spread, right? And that's right. But I think the right way to put that is to say your reasons for being interested in the item at all are weighing. Yep. Yep. Okay. That's good. That's exactly on point. Okay. So the intended reference of Napoleon is the dominant source of the information associated with the name. So you see there's something in this that's a bit like Searle, because he is talking about the cluster of information, the cluster of descriptions associated with the name, the way Searle does. But where Searle says it's whoever matches the cluster of information, Evans is saying that's not right. It's whoever is the dominant source of the cluster of information, not who best matches it. Right? So Evans is replacing Searle's notion of match with this notion of dominant source. But actually, this is really just intended reference of a single individual. The full theory is a little bit more complex than that. The full theory gets a little bit complicated. So here we go. Napoleon is a name of X if there is a community C in which it is common knowledge that members of C have in their repertoire the procedure of using Napoleon to refer to X, or equivalently with the intention of referring to X. So common knowledge just means everyone knows that this is going on. Everyone knows that everyone knows that this is going on. Everyone knows that everyone knows that this is going on. Everyone knows that everyone knows that everyone knows that this is going on, right? It's kind of out in the open that we're all doing this. And what is it that we're all doing? We are all using the name with the intention of referring to one particular person, the dominant source of the information. So we've all got this habit. We all have this particular, we all share a particular cluster of knowledge in Searle's sense, a whole body of descriptions that we associate with the name. So we all have this in our repertoire, that dossier and that thing is the dominant source. And we all know that this is going on, that we're all using that name with the intention of referring to that dominant source. We've got this procedure of using the name to refer to X, that is to say, with X as the dominant source of the body of information that we associate with NN. And then in any particular case, when I use the name Napoleon, what I'm doing is, you know that all that's going on. I know that all that's going on. I'm relying, when I use the name Napoleon, on the fact that you know about him that it's all common knowledge in the whole community that we're all using the name Napoleon in this way. And it doesn't matter whether Napoleon matches any particular description that you or I might be using. What matters is whoever's the dominant source, whoever we're all intending to refer to when we use that name. So it's not enough just that he's the dominant source of my body of information and the dominant source of your body of information. It's that we all know that we're all using the same name with pretty much the same reference. And we're relying on that when we talk. So that is a little bit complicated, but it's not very complicated. I mean, the idea, you can see what the basic idea is that we don't each refer, how should I say, we don't each refer one by one, solipsistically, not caring about what anybody else is referring to, using the name. When you use the name, you mean to be relying on the fact that everybody's using it to refer to the same thing. Okay, that's basically it for Evans's theory. So that's it. Now you know how reference works. Right? Is that really plain as day? Yeah? Okay, very good. Okay. I think Evans's theory is more nobody's confused by anything in that. One of us is very good. Okay. Okay. Okay, let me do this as an exercise. Consider the story of Spot. Remember Spot? Remember how the reference to the name Spot shifts? How does it work here? Who's the dominant source of the body of information associated with the name Spot? Yeah. Sorry? Is that right? I mean, suppose this is kind of like Napoleon, suppose the early dog had been with the family 14 years, and then the new dog's only been around for a year or two. Yeah? But in the evening, the youngest child is telling a story about what Spot did that afternoon. Who is she referring to? Would you want to say, that's all completely mistaken. Spot died years ago. And who's the dominant source then? Yeah. So it's not just who lived longest. Very good. Yeah, it will depend on which bits of the dossier are active at any one moment. Yeah. 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 So it seems to me it gives the right result in the case of Spot. Yeah, the reference shifts depending on, just as you say, on the context, on what bits of the dossier are active, what the reasons are for our interest in Spot at this moment, whoever's the dominant source of the relevant information there. So this is just the right thing to be saying, it seems to me. Yeah.
Seems like, though, that you could be referring to the other Spot, even if the context and everything makes it seem like you're referring to the Spot that's around now. Let's say that when you were one, the old Spot bit you,
Yeah.
so you were like radically affected by that Spot.
Yeah, radically traumatized. Yeah.
So even if you're saying, even if you see Spot is sick today and you say Spot's sick,
Yeah.
it seems like you can still be referring to the old Spot that was even only around for years, because it's like so radically
Traumatizing.
traumatizing.
Right. Okay, so I get bit, and that made me the sour, bitter individual I am today. Then I see the new Spot sick, and I say, Spot's sick, good. right? That's the kind of thing. And so you want to say the intended reference there is the one that bit me?
That's the one that you're thinking of.
Yeah. That is interesting because there is not quite. It's a way of bringing out how you could fill out that notion of dominant source, because it's not that my reasons. I agree with you on that. I mean, I have the same. Sounds the same to me that you're talking about the original spot in that case. But if I say good, that's what clinches it for me that I'm talking about the original spot. Yeah. But it's not so much that that's the reason I was interested in the item at all. It's not exactly that. That's how come I got interested in sport in the first place, because I might just have liked dogs. Yeah. So, but it's something like what's most important, what's most salient, what is most vivid to me in my emotional life about sport is that bite. Yeah, that's what did it. And that's what makes original sport the dominant source. It's something about, well, what is most emotionally important about the thing. Yeah, something like that is what's making it the dominant source. Yeah, because he's contributing the thing that was most salient in that sense, yeah.
Can we kind of find out which one is the most emotionally salient spot by, say, telling the boy or telling the person that this second spot is not really spot, and in that case, maybe the boy would not be so emotionally concerned with the illness of this new spot.
Very good, yeah.
If that happens, then we can tell that he really cares about the old spot. He only cares about this new one insofar as he believes it's the old one. But if he
Yeah.
then does, oh, I don't care, this is my spot,
Right.
then you can tell it's the other way around.
Very good. Yeah, you give the owner some gigantic vet bill, right? And then you say, but, and then you tell the story, right? Yeah, and then you say, no, this died. That dog died a year or two ago, and then you see if he still pays the bill, something like that. Yeah, that will affect who's the dominant source. Yeah, I'm just playing back to you what you just said. Yeah, yeah. No, I share that sense. Yeah, it's who you really mean to be talking about. Which one matters to you? Yeah, yeah.
So, now say the first spot and the second spot have a very similar characteristic and quality about them.
Yes.
So, first spot has a problem with being in the house. Second spot has the same problem with being in the house.
Right.
So, second spot being in the house, and you say spot has a real problem with being in the house without directly referring to that last incident.
Yeah. Oh. Did you say peeing or being? Okay, right. Okay. Yeah, and so they're both equally annoying and in just the same way. Is that the thing? Yeah, it's hard to tell there. If you say Spot drives me mad, yeah, Spot has destroyed most of the furniture, something like that. Which one are you referring to? Yeah. I think the thing about that is, tell me if this is right, my intuition about which one is the dominant source there is not very clear. Yeah. Because it's not like this last case where there's one single traumatic episode. The trauma is, as it were, spread over many episodes, right? And they're both equally involved in that spread out trauma. But so I don't actually have a definite intuition about which one's the dominant source. But equally, I don't have a definite intuition as to which one you're referring to. Yeah. So it seems to me that in this kind of case, your intuitions about what's the dominant source and your intuition about which one's being referred to, they go together. You know, and it's indefinite in this kind of case, it seems to me. Yeah. Yeah.
How does the community of information deal with it? It seems like there isn't a community, or so there's only like 3 people in the family.
That's right. It is like that.
Community, or even if it is, like they might mean different things by it. Like
Very good.
Doesn't care
Very
about the
good.
kid, might refer to the blue spot. 'Cause-
Very good.
So
Yeah, yeah. I strongly, I share that sense.
so then, what
Okay.
do you make of this community?
Right. There are lots of different cases here, right? This definition applies most obviously to a name like Homer or Aristotle, where there really is a community, and a good big community extending over many years, right, centuries, referring to, using the name to refer to that person with a particular associated body of information. Yeah. So this definition makes most sense for that case. It doesn't work so well, I agree. I mean, it sounds kind of un-American to say that a family is not a community. I mean, what are you saying about the family? But,
We normally see
Uh-huh.
this larger. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just my intuition of community.
Yeah, I think that's right, though. That is that's what he has in mind, something much bigger. Within a family, you'd be much more likely to allow people to go their own ways. You know, to say, I use it to refer to this one, you use it to refer to that one. Yeah. So there might be a shared
How do they?
communicate.
Yeah.
Well, they know they know what's going on in each other's mind. I mean, the thing about
Maybe not. That's the whole point of spot is that they don't know what's going on in each other's mind because they don't know which one they're referring to.
Okay, let's take this slowly. Right, okay, let's take this slowly. There are just different cases here. The thing about a large community, like the one of people who talk about Aristotle or Homer, right? The thing about that is that you can talk to a classical scholar you've never met before about Aristotle or Homer. You have no idea what's going on in their mind, and it's their use of language that reveals to you what's going on in their mind. Right? So there, you are just relying on the fact that you're in this community where it's common knowledge that everybody uses the name in this way. Yeah. So that's the benefit of this kind of use of language, that someone you don't know at all, you can talk to and find out about, exchange information about, they can give you information that reveals their mind to you, because you can take your grasp of your understanding of what they're saying as coming first. You understand what they're saying even though you have no idea what's going on in their mind. Yeah? Because there's this kind of thing going on. Now, the great thing about a family is that it's smaller, but the gain you get is that you actually do know quite a bit about the minds of the people you're in a usual case anyway, right? However alien they might seem, you do know quite a bit about their minds, yeah? So you can actually rely on that. You can use your insight into their mind to give you some grip on which one they're talking about. Yeah. The distinguished philosopher David Kaplan says that his mother had a psychiatrist called Dr. Jones, a regular family physician called Dr. Jones, and a neighbour who annoyed her very much called Dr. Jones. And so they would have conversations in which she would make remarks like, so I told Dr. Jones about Dr. Jones, and he said I should ask Dr. Jones about that. And you can do that kind of crosstalk with someone you know well, right? You just rely on your knowledge of their take on things to tip you off what's going on. Yeah? Whereas in this kind of case, you know, if it was someone you didn't know at all, you really would have no idea. Yeah. Yep. There. That's right. Yeah, that's very good. I mean, that also connects to that question about the incontinent dogs, right? That sometimes it is not definite who you're referring to, and the theory's got to respect that. You don't want a theory to give you definite answers to questions that actually don't have definite answers. Yeah, that's your point. Yeah, yeah, that's well taken. Yeah. Sorry, can you do that louder?
He ended up saying, does he actually
Well, it's one thing to say you've only got a sketch of a theory and you haven't filled in all the details yet. But I think the point of the last questioner was you don't even want to fill in all the details because the phenomenon is not of reference is not definite at every point. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, in that case, we've sorted out proper names. That's great. We can leave it there. And actually, I want to talk a bit about how Evans's theory applies in more basic cases, but I think that is really pretty much where we are today. I think that some theory like this is probably what most people would think is as close to correct as we have got. So you have got to the state of the art at this point, and any critique or any progress you can make with this is actually progress. So it's kind of over to you at this point. Figure it out. Take it to the next phase. Okay, I want to remark that this follows up that comment about families, that names are not the only ways of referring to the world, and maybe they're not even the most basic ways of referring to the world. There are ways of referring to this chair, that table, this man at the end, the screen, that aren't using names at all. They're just using terms like this table, that person, that aren't names, and there is no practice of using the term to refer to any particular thing. The whole point about these terms is they shift their reference from case to case. But you're using them on the basis of perception. That if you say, I mean, the whole thing about a name like Napoleon is that you can use it to refer to an object you can't see, an object that is hidden from view. If you get a term like this table, then you use that to refer to something on the basis that you can see it, on the basis that you can perceive it one way or another. But what does it take to be perceiving an object? Let me give you an example. Suppose, here's a kind of classic philosopher's example. Suppose there's a tomato. Here is a tomato. You can see the tomato, right? And this is you, as seen from the top, right? Okay? Now suppose you're looking directly in line at the tomato, but unexpectedly there is a mirror in the way that you don't see at 45 degrees. You with me so far? And now suppose that off to your right there is another tomato, and it, if I'm drawing this correctly, is reflected in the mirror, so that it looks to you as if there is a tomato at exactly this place. Right? So you have a tomato dossier, right? That's all right? You're getting a whole bunch of tomato-based information. Okay? And which tomato best matches the information in your dossier? The one behind the mirror or the one over here? The one behind your mirror, behind the mirror, well, in your dossier you have information about where the tomato is right in front of you, a couple of yards, right? Which tomato best matches that information? Which tomato actually is at that place? The one behind the mirror, right? Which tomato can you see? Can you see the one that is behind the mirror? No, because there is a mirror in the way. So, follow me very closely. Which tomato you're seeing is not the one that best matches your perceptual dossier of information. The tomato you're seeing is the dominant source of your information. Right? This is the one that is generating all that information, even though the information is not completely accurate about it. But it's the one you can see. So perceiving an object demands that it should be causally affecting you. When you see the object, you're getting a cluster of information. That's what your vision is. That's what your perceptual system is. It's a way of generating a whole bunch of information about a thing, building up a dossier about a thing. And which thing you see is the one that's the dominant source of the cluster of information. Yep.
So what if you're not concerned with the details of the tomato? That you're really hungry and you see the tomato and it's in front of you, and that's like 98% of why you're caring that there's a tomato there. Then
Very good.
That's why you're interested.
Very good. Yeah. Yeah. So then, how would that affect what's the dominant source, though? Can you spell that out? Would that make the one behind the mirror? Would that make the one behind the mirror the dominant source?
Like the only reason you care about it is that there is a tomato there, not about the visual, like not about the details of the color or anything like that.
That's right. Yeah.
So I don't know. Doesn't that affect why you care? Like
It will affect why you care, and it will affect what it takes to be the dominant source. Right? I think what you're saying there is completely correct. It won't affect this example. I mean, it's a great idea, but it won't affect this example because the way I set it up, the one behind the mirror is not affecting you at all. You see what I mean? So it doesn't matter how you rig it. It's not going to be in any sense the dominant source because it's not a source, dominant or not. Yeah, this is the only one that's a source of anything. But your point really will matter for the kind of case like the rugby players, where you get a tangle of limbs there, and which one you could be said to be seeing. That might really depend on why you're interested in the scene, what you're trying to focus on. Yeah. I mean, you need something where you have a kind of tangle of tomatoes, as it were. You see what I mean? It would take a little while to think through the example, but your point really will matter when you come to think about other cases. Yeah. Yeah.
I think her point kind of brings out the distinction between seeing and referring. So it seems like we can see the reflective tomato, but we can refer to the original one. Like if I'm telling you like I want that tomato because I'm hungry, I'm actually referring to the one straight ahead of me, even though it's blocked. But what I'm seeing is not that one. What I'm seeing can be reflected.
Yeah. I don't get that you're referring to it. I mean, remember, it's completely hidden by the mirror. You really have no idea about this one. Yeah? It's not that you're seeing it a bit or it's a kind of partial mirror or something. You're just not getting it at all. It might as well be behind a wall. It's just a coincidence that there's one there.
Primarily why I care is because it
At that place. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I thought like
Yeah.
refer to that one.
I think that's the way the example would work if you were getting information from both of them. I'm sorry, are we going over time? Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. Well, let me just say, this applies to memory as well. And let's leave it at that. Okay. Thank you for being so patient, and I'm sorry to have gone over time.